Is everybody on that schedule? All those
They just send it out in my.
Morning, Stephanie.
Yes.
with no date on it?
Yeah,
You can hear us, right?
I'll have to let somebody know that.
Also, I asked you in an email about the minutes.
Yeah.
For the select board meeting
Right,
as
what
well,
else
is there transcribed
What's going on?
like the Zoom?
Oh my.
No, it does not. I do those.
Back
And they're on the website.
Whereabouts?
Yes,
Oh,
because we do those as a webinar, so regular meetings, so it doesn't
Dave and
transcribe.
Barbara.
Okay,
So-
sure.
Jim,
It does kind of do. the
Sherry, we chartered
transcription, I have to cut.
45-foot catamaran.
Edit and all that stuff.
Oh, nice.
It's easy as the one.
That's where I should have been, but my cousin never made it down to Bahamas.
Yes, so those are on.
Changed a
there.
lot since I started going down in the eighties.
You know, you.
Morning, Jim.
You let me know.
More like Disneyland on there
Yeah.
now, rather than
I just
finding
wondered
a
if
private
there was
line.
a verbatim, prayer, you know.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
No,
All
it's
right, we're gonna get going.
recording, and you go down where it says more, I think when it shows the title at the bottom, it'll say show transcript, and then it will type all the words
Oh,
that were
really?
sent to me,
More,
and a timestamp.
okay.
It will, you'll look for, it's under like, if you're looking at YouTube right here, it's
Mhm.
the title, you'll see a box that says more.
Yeah.
And it'll say show transcript,
Oh,
when you hit show transcript, it will actually print out the text.
put the words, that's the
All
town.
right, good morning, you guys. We're gonna get going. It is now 8 o'clock.
That's good.
So, welcome to the February meeting, February 20th of the Camden Harbor Committee. As we, always like to say, this is a public meeting, minutes are being taken. It is being broadcast on Zoom and recorded via YouTube. If you do have comments, please direct them through me and, as the acting chair at the moment, and, try to keep things moving. I just wanted, well, we have folks on Zoom. Looks like we have Jim Bennett and Stephanie. Can you guys both give us the thumbs up? You can hear us, it sounds like. Yep. Yep. All right, cool, awesome. You're both muted, which is fine, which is great, but if you go to talk, obviously unmute yourselves, please. All right, I'm gonna try to keep this, meeting and future meetings moving a little more swiftly than we have in the past. So we're gonna kind of hold on and get ready for a wild ride as we try to fly through. Public input on non-agenda item. Does anybody have any?
Fix them in 2 minutes.
Oh, great point. We do need to have a secretary for today's meeting. So I want to talk a little bit about that actually. And as Bruce is now serving as the vice chairman, which is a position that we created for this committee. We don't actually have a secretary, which I think is fine. We're not actually obligated to have a secretary. But as such, we do need someone to take the minutes for every meeting. Elliot was kind enough to do it last month and has submitted his minutes. The minutes are being dictated and annotated, I guess, better word, via Zoom. So it's not as onerous a project as it used to be, but it is still, there is still something to be done.
But the Zoom minutes miss a lot, like
The Zoom minutes
next
miss-
meeting
yeah.
and attendance and
And
all
I think they
that.
always say that one person is always speaking or something like that. I will say that, these minutes are awesome and that both Bruce has produced for a long time and the minutes that Elliot produced. Come on, Bob. That being said, the minutes don't need to be as detailed as they have been in the past. That's a pretty heavy lift to get all of that detail in there. If you want to, fine, no problem, but, let's say that it's certainly not required. The only things really that are required are that we started the meeting and that we ended the meeting and that we, any votes that are taken are really what is required for, the minute. So I'm trying to reduce the load of what it means to be, the secretary for that meeting. Because it really shouldn't be a big deal. That being said, do we have anyone who would like to volunteer to be the secretary for this meeting? Keeping in mind that if I don't get volunteers, I will be tapping someone to serve as the secretary for this meeting. Any volunteers? Seeing none, Bob, you're it for this month.
I
You
don't.
don't have a pen, and that's actually okay. You can take a note.
Because we're not gonna take any actions.
We're probably not gonna take any actions, but also as I said, the minutes that are taken via Zoom are pretty long and pretty extensive. You can definitely use those to crib the minutes. And they can be very short. I mean, literally, the minutes can be on a Post-it, you know what I mean? We've gotten pretty long in some of ours. And sometimes that's great. Sometimes that's very helpful, but it is not required. I'm trying to really reduce what is required for all of us on this. So, okay, what else? So we have 4 members here, so we do have a quorum, 5 members, excuse me. We do have quorum, which is wonderful. All right, any public input on non-agenda items?
Yeah, I got one. Hey, Josh.
Happy thing.
I think it would be useful.
Turn on your mic, just so they can get.
Good morning. I think it would be useful for the Harbor Committee members to listen to the select board meeting of January 9th and the discussion about harbor fees. And that gives a view of what the positions of the select board and the town manager are regarding fees. And it provides a context that we have not had in our deliberations about harbor fees and our annual reviews.
I agree. Thank you for bringing that up, Elliot. I was gonna bring it up later, but let's talk about it now.
January 9th?
January 9th.
Okay.
Yeah, January 9th, and I mean, it would be great if every member of the community attended every public meeting in town. Obviously, that's not feasible for everyone. But the select board meetings being the governing body, I guess you could call it, of the town, obviously that's an important one. So anybody who's on a committee, it would be great if you can just pop in, just watch the recordings, if it's live. You can watch it via Zoom or pop in. They are always illuminating. The discussion about the fees, you guys may recall, at the last meeting, I mentioned that, we had come up with, we'd done our review, which spanned a couple of different meetings, and went through it point by point. And I learned by reading the packet, what was not informed, I learned that the select board, the town staff had proposed a lot of different fees, different from what we had recommended, and didn't let us know. So obviously that was disappointing, and I did register our objection, I guess, to that, and suggested to Sophie Romana that maybe for this year, one option would be to accept our recommendations, and to, if they want to make larger changes, to make those for the next year, or propose those for the next year, because we'll, we review, as part of our mandate, if you will, we review those every year. That didn't happen, and the select board did adopt all of the town staff's recommendations for harbor fees as presented. There was a couple of statements that were made that I found, I think this may be what Elliot is referring to. The discussion was about that we're trying to cover more of the harbor fees. The harbor fees are trying to cover more of the costs. And I found that interesting just because we had specifically asked for the budget prior to our deliberations to make sure that we knew kind of why we would need to raise rates and why we ought to raise rates. And that didn't happen, meaning that the budget was, we got the budget, we reviewed it. No town staff has ever been present, with the exception of Steve and Jeremy Martin, at these meetings. So we had no other guidance other than what we had solicited ourselves. One of the select board members, Allison McKellar, actually did say that, in fact, the goal is not actually just to cover the costs, but rather to make the harbor a revenue center for the town, a profit center. It was surprising to me, and I didn't think that was part of our mandate. but it was very surprising to me to hear that. So, moving forward, they did say that the town staff did say that they want to be more involved and they want to, be part of the discussion. And, when the harbor committee reviews, fees in the future. I hope that they will do so. I hope that they will come to these meetings. I think it is, you know, in the past, the harbor clerk has come to all of these meetings and, town staff made the decision that they should not. And I think that has led to some lack of communication between the town staff and this committee, and that's disappointing. These meetings are always, at most 2 hours. I hold that to a hard stop. And I'm trying to make it even less. So I think that would be a way for us to remove some of that miscommunication, if you want to call it that, or a lack of communication, I think would be a better term for it. So anyway, thank you for bringing that up, Elliot. I
Right,
agree.
and another comment I have about that is, in that, select board discussion, there was no discussion of actual harbor revenue from any year, nor actual harbor expenses. So while there was talk about having harbor fees cover the expenses and more, there was no talk about what those expenses are or have been.
Correct. Yeah. It was an interesting discussion, to say the least. Anything else in public input on non-agenda items?
Well, I just gotta react. That, one, I guess I would have a problem. If we were included in the discussion, I would have a problem with the idea of turning public assets into profit centers for what? Exactly. But beyond that, it just makes me feel like the effort of my late night last night, my shower that went cold this morning, so I had to wait, that's why I was a few minutes late, to have it re-kick in, to get down here to express opinions that nobody cares about, is completely devaluing. And maybe we had the immortal harbor clerk Liz, who was here all the time, who actually watches. But honestly, what is the point? But really bluntly, and I see one select board member there, but I don't see the point of us taking the time to think about things if nobody cares.
Or, I mean, we are an advisory committee. That being said, it was difficult to see our advice being not just not taken, but completely ignored.
It's not just ignored, because they didn't care to let us actually know what they would talk about.
Right.
So basically, we are talking to the four winds at 8 a.m.
Right, for two separate meetings, or at least, I think it was 3 meetings that,
Thanks.
anyway, I agree with you. Moving on, meeting minutes, January 9th meeting minutes. Did anybody get a chance to scan through those? Thank you again, Elliot, for doing that. If so, does anybody have a motion on said minutes?
I wasn't here, so I'll recuse myself.
Oh, all right. Anybody else? I'll make a motion that we accept Elliot's fine submission of the January 9th meeting minutes. I didn't see any changes that needed to be made myself. Anybody else? Anybody have a second on that?
Second.
Wow, thank you. Further discussions on the January 9th meeting minutes.
Superb as always. I wish always, but
Elliot,
superb ending.
Elliot, you're supposed to make 1 or 2 mistakes to see if other
To
people are
make sure that
reading.
we're reading them.
He's probably got one buried in.
Yeah, there's some hidden ones in.
All right, Jim, we have a motion to accept and a second to accept the January 9th meeting minutes. If seeing no further discussion, all those in favor 1, 2, 3. Jim, are you abstaining or are you voting? Oh, 4, thank you. 4, nothing, thanks very much. All right, memorial bench application. So we do have a memorial bench application, which you guys have received in your packet. This is a little bit of a different one, in that it is not for, it's for not a public landing. This is the first one that I have seen, that is not on the public landing. It is apparently at the site of where the Harp Colony used to be on municipal property there, at the end of Marine Avenue, I believe it is.
Marine Avenue.
Yeah.
Was that done by Steamboat?
It's just to the east of Springfield, yeah.
So, yeah, there's a little picture, I don't know if you, yeah, you guys got that, a little picture of sort of where it's to be located. And I thought there, you know, part of our duties, our mandate, whatever, is that we do have to approve or review the, memorial benches application, and we do have to have a demonstrated connection to the town of Camden. I did feel that there was a suitable connection to the town of Camden. I like the, inscription or whatever that's called on
The epitaph.
epitaph, all right. On the bench, I thought was great.
Except for it looks like it's way more letters than are allowed, and there's no spaces in between the words.
I thought,
Isn't it supposed to be 40 characters?
oh, because I didn't even see that, but it went over.
I think they can do that, it just costs more money.
Oh, okay.
Um,
I think it's great to have, that was a world famous art school here for a long time
yeah,
in the Smiling Cow building.
in the Smiling
I
Cabin.
think it was, yeah. I think that was the school.
This
That may
it
have
was,
been
this it
great.
was down by,
This
by
was-
Marine Avenue.
Yeah,
Oh, is that where it was?
well, there was a house almost, I don't know if it was at the end or almost at the end.
All right.
Or- I don't
Maybe
know
I
if
had that
was just
wrong.
residential or if that was what I always thought.
Yeah, well, Audrey and I met with the woman that wants to do this, and she was very happy. That's where she said, could she have it? And I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, there's enough room there, we could want there.
My only question was that, assuming it's an appropriate place for a bench, I think it's a wonderful bench.
Yeah.
So, I would totally agree with that. My only concern is that, it's not a public landing, and in the ordinance where it talks about what the harbor committee can do, it specifically says memorial benches at the public land. I think that's probably because at the time that was written, it was not suggested that there be more public benches. I think public benches are great, so I'm not sure anyone's going to ever, oppose that. That being said,
Aren't there increasingly benches at the various access points, like the little loop that comes off down below the Camden Harbor Inn? I think I saw a bench on
Really?
that spot.
And there's one at the end of Eaton too.
Yep.
But
Yeah, there does
it's
seem
not
to
one of
be-
these benches, it's just
Ah.
a bench.
oh, that's interesting. So I guess that would be my only thought on this, is that I do think that the town needs to clarify what our role is in approving memorial benches throughout town, on any municipal property. And also that it be clarified what review goes into where these benches are sited. I get, Steve says that it's a good location, great, but I think we need to look at the property lines and all that, make sure that it is. I would assume that would go through a code enforcement or something. The planning department, I would assume, would be the ones who would do that. So I do think there'll be more of these benches requested.
Are these benches are they in the ordinance?
The benches are in the ordinance, but it's benches at the public land.
Hmm.
Only,
So
and
a
there is
change
a
would
limited,
require a vote.
and there's a limited number. So a change would require, a change to the ordinance would require, which happens. You know what I mean? They do clerical, and I would
Mhm.
sort of argue that's a. clerical.
Sure, that's a one sentence change.
Yeah, but it does have to happen, it is a sort of legal thing. All right, any other, discussion
So I'd make a motion
All right,
that assuming it is legal to have a bench at public access points to the public waters of the harbor. And if we are meant to express opinions about that, we support this concept after those two questions are answered by the town attorney. Good luck to the guy who has to write that up.
yeah, exactly. Well, I'm not watching that one. And you said whether it's okay to have benches at these public access.
First of all, is it okay to have benches at, and I'm trying to limit it, not all over town or whatever, but these places are different because they are public access to the harbor,
Yeah,
Make it.
which is like the
memorial,
town landing.
make it memorial benches, because there are just plain benches.
Yeah,
Yeah.
memorial benches, I guess.
Mhm.
And that, and assuming we are allowed to express opinions, our opinion would be this particular bench is good.
This one be approved, I agree with you. And that's actually an interesting point, is are we, are these memorial benches only on harbor access points? Because, why not have one at, the Village Green? Why not have one at the Snowball?
Well, that's not our job.
You know,
We do,
well,
we do
exactly.
know that.
Exactly, but I think we need to be a little bit careful of that these are harbor memorial benches. Maybe that's how they should be rephrased instead of, because right now it's application for Camden Public Landing Memorial Bench. It's not actually.
Well, there's the public landing and there are public landings. And as I was saying, what I'm talking about is, in theory, you can bring your kayak ashore, carry it up where this is,
Mhm.
carry it up and, put it on your car and go.
That
That's a harbor
that
public
becomes a public
access.
landing.
It's not the public landing,
Yeah.
but it is a public landing.
That might be a way out.
Exactly. All right, so we have a motion, to accept this,
I'll second
with the, after review by the town attorney and or whoever else is appropriate. And you second that?
I'll second it.
Bruce seconds that, all right. Okay. Further discussion on the memorial bench application. Oh, looks like Jim has a hand up, so hold on, I gotta, review. All right, I think that's you, Jim.
Yeah, it's me. I regret my ignorance about this matter, in terms of town ordinances, but is there a uniform standard for what these benches are constructed of, what they look like, et cetera? That's question one. Question two is, can we see exactly where the bench is gonna be located? Because I just see this general picture of the landing and it's like, oh, this could be anywhere. And it might end up being in a place where it could interfere with access to the to the the racks where the boats are stored and so forth. So that's my second question. Where exactly are they talking about putting it?
I think that would probably be part of the review that would have to happen from at the town, staff level, is that they would have to cite exactly where this is going to go.
Mr. Chairperson, I could help out with the construction materials of the bench for the first question. So to answer that first question, when I started in 2001, all the benches were a certain type, kind of a little less stronger, a lighter, wind could blow them over. All I did was I saved the pattern of what they look like, the overall look, but I went to Rockwood steel and the steel base is probably twice as thick. And instead of pine, I use meridian, which is a very dense wood. So it's just more of a solid, more weatherproof bench. We make them the same way. They're 6 feet long. It's the same look. And the epitaph is the second plate down. So, and as far as where it's gonna go, I mean, so town manager and I looked at this with the woman and she wanted it, and there's a spot, there's a rock, and just off where the actual new aluminum ramp is, when I put in 2 years ago, I'm sorry, the aluminum dinghy storage. And to be honest, I never went and said, here's exactly where it's gonna go. We have a general idea where the bench would look good, so. We could probably look at it again, but
I think that would be, part of the review by the town attorney and or planning department. I think that's, appropriate, that we know exactly where, anytime we're putting something on municipal property permanently. I think it's important that we know exactly where it is, rather than leaving it to, any one person. I think we need to know on a map, on a plan, exactly where it's gonna be. I think that's a great
I
suggestion.
disagree a little bit. I think that's the job of the harbor master to choose the exact spot.
Well, no, I think, let's let the town staff determine that, but B, that's really, now we're on land. Now we're in a planning, now
But
we're
we're
in
in the Camden public landing or whatever, we're in a public access to the harbor, which is our jurisdiction.
well, actually, the public landing isn't really our jurisdiction, it's the water side is, that's where we get into that weird
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
interplay, I guess. So,
yeah, that's something that I could talk with Audra about, exactly, since it's a new area,
yeah,
see how that goes.
I would think Audra and especially the planning department, I think they need to be involved because there may be setbacks, there may be, I don't know, there's stuff that may be involved there that
Mhm.
we don't know. Is it going into the ground? Is this thing gonna be, I think it's not sitting on the ground. It's not gonna be,
All the other ones, just, they're so heavy,
they just sit
put
there.
in place.
Yeah, cool. So no, there's no dig safe. All right, so we have a motion, a second, further discussion. All those in favor of approving this memorial bench application with the, qualifications, that Bob suggested? All those in favor, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And
We got 5.
Five. Thank you very much. Harbor master report. Makes it quick. Anything big?
yeah, geez, I'm working on, so the big thing I'm working on right now is we're still trying to get a quote. We have an engineer to not redesign the steamboat landing, but, we have a quote to fix it the way it was before that storm. And then I have some new concrete, which is much thicker and heavier. They're about 2 tons a piece. And it's, a little more expensive, but we have that, and so we're putting that together with the engineer. Should have that by this week, because we're starting to wrap up our budget stuff. So that's been big, been working along with inspectors and trying to figure out how they're gonna be on the private sector, fixing all the stuff that broke during the storm. We did really well, the town infrastructure, we had no damage from the last storm, so I was really happy about that. Still finishing up the restrooms, public restrooms, we painted the whole interior and kind of gave it a facelift. Having a little issue with homeless person breaking into the back and sleeping in there, but we'll figure that out.
I have a question about steamboat landing.
Yeah,
When you go for the bigger, slabs, is that gonna be a complete replacement or just a replacement of the parts that?
no, yeah, we're gonna redo the whole thing.
That's great. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. That's about it.
What role, if any, are you playing, Steve, in the, reconstruction, collection, et cetera, of all the damage that was done, to private property in the harbor? So all the piers got wiped out essentially, it sounded like, except for I think one or two, in the outer harbor. Where are you involved in reclaiming those? A lot of them blew into Shining Cove, so we want to make sure those come out.
Yeah, I was trying to be liaison to a certain landowner and people that wanted to go across their property about a month ago, with prop coming up and stuff like that. So I'm tangentially involved with that, but it is private stuff. I'm just gonna help, as usual, when there's a gray area, I'll just use common sense and try to get people to talk and communicate. That's really all I can do.
Okay.
So piers in Sherman's Cove got wiped out with that?
Well, there aren't any in Sherman's Cove, but in the outer harbor.
Oh, that's right, yeah, outer harbor.
The outer harbor.
Leading up to
wiped
Sherman's
out.
Cove.
Yep, I think 4 of them, 4, yeah.
Wow.
So, are you doing anything, Steve, to help, homeowners in the outer harbor whose piers were damaged and need to get them rebuilt. Are you in contact with them? Do you help them, or they reach out to you?
Yeah, again, I've talked to, especially Mr. Rickson, who's had a lot to lose because he didn't have any insurance on that, because he didn't have a home on it. So he's like really trying to facilitate getting his out, because his wasn't damaged, it was just way up in there.
Mm.
Or, you know, so that was good that I was able to help him. Yeah, so I mean, again, tangentially, I'm helping them just by kind of talking to them and saying, oh, I would do it this way, this might be your best course. But, you know, they know I'm not a lawyer, I just kind of go with common sense and say it's a small community and let's work together and.
Was cribbing damaged or just wooden part?
Oh, yeah, a lot was damaged, cribbing,
Wow.
just basically got wiped off.
Wow.
And got knocked off.
Steve, there was damage to the stone stairs at Marine Avenue, public access at Lake Beach. And elsewhere, I don't know, those are the two that I've seen. And what's gonna happen with those?
They're, you know, Jeremy's looking at that and we're talking with FEMA about how much they're gonna help us. But yeah, they're gonna get fixed, I'm not sure how and who, but.
I just saw Marine last weekend, I was kind of surprised, it just got wiped out.
Yeah. Yeah, as you guys know, it was the most violent storm and all over up and down the coast. That's exactly what happened. Things that never got touched before just got picked up and, you know, tossed.
Yeah.
So it really, I would think as a community, it's making us kind of be like, okay, I guess we do have to start talking about this resilience thing, because wow, 2 storms like that, 3 days apart, pretty sobering.
Has
One
anyone,
the year before, too.
has anyone approached you to rebuild their piers via the guidelines that we, this committee suggested? Or they said, have they come to you? I guess that's our question. Did they come to you and say, how do we rebuild this? Or do you say, and then do you kick them to the
Yeah,
town?
Yeah, I kicked them, I mean, I've only had one person kind of say, what's the deal here, and permitting and thing, and I said, you wanna go to Jeremy?
Okay.
So one last question. The dock that is sort of all the way out on Sherman's Point, that's almost got a protection built into it. Did that also get wiped, or did that stand?
As far as I know, that didn't sustain any damage.
Yeah, okay.
They feel like a little breakwater right in
Right.
that little basin there.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Steve. Busy time in the harbor. I'm assuming that all of those changes, or improvements, your goal is to get them done by the summer. I would say, like Lake Beach, Harbor Road.
Well, the big thing is Steamboat Landing, and it's been weighing on me, because I told Dave and other people, I said, if we don't start this soon, they say, oh, we can fix it anytime. I'm like, no, once spring starts and that starts getting used, you can't shut that down for 4 days, because that's what it would take.
Right.
And he said, well, what do you mean? I mean, these people go somewhere else. I'm like, no. And once the season starts, I would think it
At
would
this
be.
point, could they even use Steamboat Landing?
Yes, I don't know, well, just this past week, we
Cleaned up and pushed things
you
around?
should have seen what we did. Nick, who was the front loader, he's not his first rodeo with this, you know. It looks pretty good, once again, it looks like you could definitely easily launch a boat. Now it's all the broken stuff put back together with the new crushed rock, and big storm comes and you know what's gonna happen, because it's, you know, the connectors are all old and.
But assuming no storm, you could drive a trailer down it.
For sure, right now you could easily launch a boat. That being said, I'd love to fix it before,
God,
just so.
it sure didn't look like it could be put back
Yeah.
together at all.
Humpty Dumpty.
I was just gonna say, Humpty Dumpty, no, it looks good. I mean, the worst ones, I said, why don't you just put the good ones here where the tire's gonna go, and put the ones that are cracked under where the floats go, because that's just rounding out on it, and no one's tires are on them, so.
As part of that sort of rebuild, stabilization of Steamboat Landing this spring, is any work planned on the parking area and or the signage for the parking area? The parking area was the last few years has really it's gotten smaller and smaller as everything has kind of grown over. And it's not particularly useful.
I mean, Cove Road.
Cove Road, the Cove Road parking. side of town.
I mean, that's something we could look at and clear a bunch of branches out and that back area, but maybe.
I think anything, I mean, that is such a no man's land back there, and there's trucks parked, you know, and there's moorings, there's all kinds of stuff back there. I think the more we can do to make that actually useful, since
Yes.
this is such a used
I've always
facility.
thought if we could somehow, there's like a wet area way in the back.
Yeah.
You could put a plastic culvert in there and build it up, so that whole area could be used for parking.
Well, I sort of see the Cove Road parking lot as part of the Steamboat Landing. And so in that way, I think when you're working on it, I would say it would make sense to look at it together and sort of say, if we're improving this, how do we improve that?
Yeah, we included it in our report.
We did include that in that.
I don't know
report.
what that means anything.
That report in Norman. All right, awesome. Thank you, Steve.
I do have a question for Steve.
Yeah.
I listened to the planning board meeting from January 15th, and there was a presentation by Angela Brewer from state
Yeah.
group, I can't define. In her presentation, she mentioned conservation moorings. And I wondered if you, Steve, have any specific knowledge about conservation moorings?
Those are the helix moorings.
What she described as a helical anchor.
Yeah, we were using them about 15 years ago. You actually screw them into the mud. And,
You were using that?
well, yeah, we had them. I mean, they never caught on. I don't know why, but I remember at one point, one of the inspectors was, yeah, he had this huge pipe and he would go underwater and he would drive it into the ground and it was rated for so many tons. It was nice because in shallow waters, you could bury that eye pretty low. And so even in shallow waters, that wasn't something that your boat was gonna end up hitting like a block. If you're blocking at low water, it's only 3 feet deep, but the block's 3 feet, then it's gonna be above the water at low tide, so you're gonna end up hitting that. Yeah, I've nothing against them. They rate pretty well. I've done some research on them.
There was a graphic that she showed, and she described that there was no bottom chain used with these conservation moorings. The bottom chain, which will scour the ground around the point where it's anchored. And she said that this was eliminating the bottom chain. Is that your understanding?
Well, they do have these special straps that they can stretch with the tide. But that's where a lot of my inspectors didn't trust them.
So they were used with bottom chain?
The ones that we had bottom chain.
Do you know if they're still in place?
No, those have been basically, we had maybe 6 of them and they're already gone.
Let's, I'm gonna bring this up in a further agenda item, so let's, do you mind, we just, we'll turn it, it's a great, I'm glad you brought it up.
How much of the water is rock versus mud?
Oh, it's all like 98% mud.
All right, we're gonna move on then, trying to keep things moving here. Pier moratorium update. So, as we all know, the pier moratorium, has been in place now for, I think, just about 2 years. We had our recommendations, which we put forward, the select board, changed those recommendations and made them apply only to existing piers. And that's what was approved back in, November. And now there are other discussions going on, but in terms of the actual pier moratorium, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm looking at you, Stephanie, on this one, but correct me if I'm wrong, the pier moratorium was extended, has it already been extended? Yeah, that's what I thought, the last meeting, at the 15th or whatever. Okay, so the pier moratorium has been extended now, I forget exactly when, but it gets us to the June ballot, is my understanding. If, depending on what measures are put forward to the voters, because that has not been determined yet, then something would either be put on that ballot or not. It could be something very different from what we presented, or it could be the same as what we presented, but applying to new peers, now in addition, which is what our recommendation was.
Stephanie,
Josh?
Oh, hello.
So the planning board on February 29th is having a hearing for what's going to be presented to the select board. So in case you weren't aware of that important meeting, that will be what is brought forth for language to the select board.
Awesome, thank you. That's perfect, because that moved me to the next agenda, so thank you for moving the meeting along. Yes, so as Stephanie said, the planning board has taken our suggestions, I guess, our report, and went quite a lot, as you guys all saw their proposal that they've put forward, and as Stephanie said, they will be discussing at a public hearing on the 29th. It is a far, far greater scope than what we put forward, as you guys can all read. It is much, much more restrictive to what I would argue is a de facto ban, because though we are not allowed to ban peers by law, the hoops that this would require is, I'm not a planner or a lawyer, but I would say that it is extremely restrictive, possibly completely restricted. So anyway, that being said, there's sort of two things going on. There's the planning board proposal, which is one thing, but there's also the moratorium. So there's sort of two things moving forward. One is, how do we deal with this moratorium, which by law can only be extended in 6 months increments. It has been extended 2 years already. The planning board is using that as part of their discussion and their proposal, but it goes far beyond the elements of the moratorium. And so it is an option for the select board to put forward, for instance, the harbor committee's recommendation to voters as presented, as we presented it, to make it apply to the existing peers that, and then continue a discussion on the planning board's proposal. That is one option. They can also, I'm preaching to the choir here, but Stephanie knows, they can also take the planning board's recommendation and put that forward and use that as a way to address and or complete the moratorium. So that's about all I'll say on that one. I will say, if anyone has opinions, one sec, Jim. If anybody has opinions on the planning board's peer ban, peer restrictions rather, proposal, I would strongly recommend that you present those either before the 29th, so that, you know, in writing, or at the 29th meeting. That is their chance for public input. I'm sure that there will be, I hope that there will be a lot of public input at that meeting. And if you have opinions, don't stay silent.
Does anyone know the time of that meeting?
They're always at 5 o'clock. I don't know yet if it is, the planning board's meetings have historically all been via Zoom. I don't know if that one will be Zoom only or a hybrid. So I just watch the town website for exactly when that is. Mr. Bennett.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's going to be a very important discussion at the select board, so I do expect to be in attendance if I can. I just, my comment is that I think the depending on how you read the current ordinances, that, you know, literally all of the piers in the outer harbor except one, I believe, were totally destroyed. And so this new ordinance would apply to all of the piers that are being replaced. And because the criteria was, you know, if the pier has been more than 50% damaged, then it has to, then it falls under the new regulation or the new ordinance. So I think this may get a lot of attention for the very reason that you point out, Josh, that there's a lot of requirements that weren't there before. And the other, I guess, factor is, you know, there's been quite a bit of discussion about, you know, even adding additional requirements to that, because I've been asked about it myself, changing the materials and, you know, the required specs on materials, and also the height of the piers is going to be, you know, there's going to be some proposed changes to that. So, you know, I think it's pretty major overhaul that's being contemplated. But more than that, it's the fact that it's going to be potentially retroactive to all of these piers that were destroyed in the storm. So it's likely to draw a lot of attention from the waterfront owners.
Yeah, it is broad, and while a lot of work has been done by the planning board and by town staff to help the planning board move this process forward, it has been a remarkably abridged process for something of this scope. I mean, this is a massive change for the harbor, and for it to have been put forward and developed over the course of, I want to say 2 months, something like that, that the planning board has actively started engaging and had town staff actively engaging, for it to then go all the way to where we are now, to a public hearing, and then potentially being put on the June ballot is lightning fast and surprising for something of that scope. That's my biggest objection, is that it seems like this has moved from 0 to 100 very, very, very quickly.
Right, process question.
Yep.
On the moratorium, we were asked to express an opinion about a proposal. Are we gonna be asked to express anything, or have we reached the official stage of don't need their opinion?
I don't know the complete answer to that, Bob. I know that I've been kept in the loop by town staff as the planning board has developed their proposal. And I've had discussions with them. That being said, I don't believe that harbor committee, a harbor committee opinion is required on this. I don't know if it will be solicited. I don't know if it will be requested. I don't know if an opinion is given, if it will be heard. But so I guess the answer is, I don't really know. We are an advisory committee, so they don't have to ask us anything.
Right, but Stephanie, hitting that first point we talked about earlier, the idea that a major thing about piers, and I did look at it, and honestly, I thought, yes, it makes it a more complicated process, but, and every time you put a generalized term in, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, it raises lots of questions. But the bottom line is, I find it, if something like this is gonna happen, honestly, I don't care about being on a board that's asked about memorial benches, but not about piers or a committee.
Yeah, fair.
So to me, there's a statement being made here as to whether the harbor committee means anything. I'll just leave it at that.
Fair question. All right, moving on to the next item next, it sort of does play into all of that, is the harbor resiliency plan. So obviously in December, we had a doozy of a storm, and in January, we had 2 back-to-back storms, all historic, honestly. I think that certainly called attention to the need for a plan, a examination of what we can do to protect all of Camden Harbor, from the impacts of climate change, sea level rise, and, everything related to it. I have gone through the, ordinance to figure out what the harbor committee can do and can't do. And it is my belief in reading that, that it is not only it is our right and I would argue, our obligation to move forward with creating a harbor resiliency plan for the town, for the harbor, Camden Harbor, to encompass the entire harbor, i.e. the coastal harbor, outer harbor, and inner harbor, which is what is our purview. I think that we have taken pieces of it and addressed it over the years, whether it was Steamboat Landing, we did a couple of years ago, and then the work on the moratorium and the pier and other structures in the outer harbor, that discussion. I think we began it, but we did it in pieces. And I think that this is the time for us to create something more all-encompassing. And that involves all the stakeholders involved in the process. So by that, I mean, I think that we do need to be looking at the built environment, as I call it, which would be all the piers, structures, and other man-made things that are in Camden Harbor, all three harbors, if you will. I think we also a very active stakeholder, and one that has been brought forward a lot in this piers discussion, is the natural environment, which is definitely a stakeholder in this. So I think that our harbor resiliency plan needs to involve both of those entities. Make sure that they both have a voice and are strongly considered. I think we also need to look at other proposals that have been put forward, and by that I mean the breakwaters. The breakwater discussion started. We had some meetings at this level, and then it was not pursued any further by the town. And I think that it is our obligation as harbor committee members to, good morning, to carry that forward and move that along. So for that, I think that we do need to re-engage as the harbor committee with the Army Corps of Engineers and the community. More important than the Army Corps of Engineers is communication with the community. Let's talk about what a breakwater means. At this planning board meeting the other day, I found it fascinating. They had this guy named Pete Slavinsky, I think is his name, he's a geologist with the state. And he started talking about living breakwaters, which was a really cool concept. Maybe something a little different than what what people think of when you think of a breakwater. Oh, is that going to be this big pile of stone? It might be, but this was a different concept of how to make it something where that natural environment is more a part of it. So I think re-engaging with that process and maybe taking a lead in that process is going to be important. And then lastly, and thank you, Jeremy, for coming. I think talking a little bit about and involving the other studies and programs that are already underway for the harbor. There's one that was underway for the public landing, and Jeremy was amazingly able to get it expanded to not the whole harbor, but more of the harbor to include that. And I think knowing that that is underway is fantastic. And I guess what I'm saying is this harbor resiliency plan needs to involve everyone and everything. So it's just a little plan, but I think that I think we saw that this is not sustainable, what we're seeing. And we have this proposal from the planning board being put forward. I think that those kinds of restrictions should be evaluated within this harbor resiliency plan. That would be where this built environment would come into play. And I think we would look at that and say, okay, what is the role of that? How can that be addressed in this? So, that's kind of my, my proposal for this committee is that we move that forward. And start building it with those elements that I just described, just four of them. Any discussion on that? Not a big one? Elliot?
Josh, I communicated with you, and asked the question, what is the role of the harbor committee in helping the community address the challenges of sea level rise and storm surge? And you've given us a response here. I wonder, Jeremy, have you been listening to our meeting this morning?
No, I'm sorry. I thought it was tomorrow.
That's
I'm really, really sorry. I was walking up to do something else and I saw you said, I'm like, oh, no. I'm sorry.
Your entrance was perfectly.
It's perfectly
No, I
fine.
see that. And I was actually going to get Audra to sign the revised climate resiliency grant to send to the state, because they said.
Can you tell us a little bit
We're good to
about
go.
And how you expanded it? I mean, you did it at the meetings, they're just a quickie.
Yeah, so remember we obtained a grant for, to look at the public landing to do, make that more resilient, $60,000, 2 grants. And then the storms in January hit and, it made us rethink, that whole, priority. So now we're gonna do a climate resiliency plan, harbor, for the entire inner harbor and then the outer harbor going over, from the heavy vessel lift over to, the bean yard. We couldn't include the whole outer harbor, but we're doing the inner harbor and so going from the lift, the condo, steamboat landing, and then the bean yard, looking at that. So that's great. I'm gonna put out an RFP hopefully in the next month after this gets signed. And then I'll put this up on the website and I can share copy the grant application to everyone. It's remarkable, the state just did a switch like this. I had already done a bunch of work on both of these grants. Thankfully, I didn't do any drawdowns yet. So they're allowed us to transition these grants to look at the whole harbor resiliency plan. Whole harbor, I mean inner harbor and unfortunately outer.
Can we, so as, part of what we're proposing is looking at truly the whole harbor. So we could use, am I correct that we can use that plan, which is a partial harbor resiliency plan, to be a major component of a larger, truly all-encompassing harbor resiliency?
Yeah, I think one of the intentions in here is to be able to take what's done here and kind of replicate it out in the outer harbor too. So that's part of, I think that's, from my perspective, there's like a phase 1 to this and a phase 2. It's kind of how I'm seeing it.
Is the yacht club included in the plan?
The yacht club is in the.
Okay, so that's
is in the
considered in
outer
our.
harbor starts on the, right there, Kastner and, the yacht club property, so, yeah,
But that's not part of this grant.
sure.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Wait, I thought you said, what's the heavy lift?
The travel at Lyman Morris.
Right, but if it goes from there over to the bean yard, that wouldn't include the yacht.
No, it goes from the bean yard across, and I was just remarking, because the inner harbor is yacht club over to the heavy vessel lift that they
Okay.
have.
Okay.
This is gonna extend a little bit further over to pick up, bean yard, steamboat landing, the condos, and then over to.
Oh, okay, I thought you were just doing the.
No,
And everything in the inner harbor.
correct.
And that's
Which is
municipal
everything.
and private.
Yep,
That's a
yep,
whole bunch of.
yep. I mean, I have to be careful on 10,000 of this grant has to be, towards municipal, stuff, so. And that's the Shoreham Harbor Planning Grant, 10,000 of that 60,000, so I just gotta keep, that's a paperwork issue for me.
So do you call the yacht club part of the municipal because we own the fee, so to speak?
I have been, and I will say, well, we're getting funding, FEMA is directing funds for repairs, that have been made. Not from these January storms, these would be from the Christmas storm
Yeah.
prior, to the yacht club property, because it is municipal infrastructure is how we've approached it with them.
Would it be possible to get an additional grant? Out to cover maybe through the January storm packages that are coming forward, to cover a larger plan, you see what I'm saying?
Any of the funds that come through from those storms in January are just, right now are municipal public infrastructure funds, not for planning purposes. Those are just for actually repairs, that have been done. And unfortunately, I can't go to the well that I've been going to on this grant, through the governor's office, of policy innovation of the future. They've had 3 rounds, thus far. They've got a 4th round this spring. They're not allowing any communities that have obtained prior funds to apply for this 4th round. So this is the largest one we've received, really, out of those 3. So.
Are there federal grants as well that we could go to?
Yeah, it's also about bandwidth and the ability to do all this at, a certain time. I'm doing the best I can. There's BRIC, just building resilient infrastructure communities, which is a FEMA grant program that is something I'm looking at, for kind of a bigger stuff.
So, I mean, it's great to hear, because it seems like, 1 second, it does seem like we're, if there's a silver lining in the December and January storms, it kind of woke us all up to that, action is required now. We actually do need to kind of be moving this stuff forward, and waiting around for any individual, or entity to act is not really going to be, not gonna be enough. And we have things happening already, whether it's this, harbor resiliency plan for part of the harbor that's already funded, or the planning board discussion, which is, led to a lot of, new conversations about, resiliency in the built environment, and all that kind of stuff. I think it's all heading in the same direction, and I'm hoping that we can help, bring it all together into a comprehensive, document. And I don't even want to use that word document, actually, a comprehensive, conversation, call it that, because, you missed the earlier part of our meeting, but there is some, concern about plans, because they have written documents that might go on a shelf and never get read. And so we want to make sure that this is not that. This is more of a conversation and a community-wide, truly community-wide discussion, because what happens in the harbor will impact everybody in Camden, whether it's a homeowner or a business. It's not just the harbor. The harbor is a key part of the community, but
the plans that you say sit on the shelves, I totally agree. And that's why what was the impetus for this original grant was that we had the T.Y. Lin report, and we had the other working water project that the state did, and they were sitting there.
Yeah.
And so that was the idea, was to kind of take those 2 documents, plans, and actually bring them to fruition,
make something
happen.
I saw our hand up over here. somewhere. Jim.
That was me, Josh. Well, so 2 things. One, I want to compliment Jeremy on his new assignment. I mean, on taking the initiative to get the town moving ahead on this, because these grants are critical. Your work there, Jeremy, is really you're at the pointy end of the spear. So we fully support and endorse what you're doing there to get these grants effectively moving us ahead. The second item I have is the question is that in the town has a long range plan, as the budgeting, part of the budgeting process, there's a forecast of future expenditures and priorities and so forth. And that long-term budget document, which is basically a 5-year look ahead, includes $250,000 for breakwater analysis and feasibility. So I think that this plan that we're talking about, resiliency plan, has to engage the actual town in the financial side of this problem. It can't just be a full of platitudes. And so that's going to be the challenge in my mind is doing anything to be really effective in what we're trying to do, which is stop Mother Nature from, rendering our harbor useless, is going to cost some money. And hopefully the financial side of this is going to be addressed as part of this planning effort. Because if it's not, the plan is nothing but a pretty piece of paper. It's useless. So that's my comment is we really need to buckle down and look at, what do we want to do? And then what is it going to cost? And then how are we going to get it done? How are we going to get the funding? And those have to be the focuses of this effort, or it's not going to amount to anything. But again, thank you, Jim. It's really critical what you're doing.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, Jim. But I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth here. Microphone's flashing.
You need two microphones for that.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I think that we do need to figure out what we're gonna do, and what we want to do as a community. But I think that we also, and we need to let the data, as I've always said in this committee, that we need to let the data drive the discussion to some degree, and that includes the financials. But I want to be very, very careful that we have the right data. So, and the price tag of a Breakwaters proposal is a perfect example of one that has been a very moving target. The Army Corps had an initial budget of, I think it was a little over 12 million. And then we repriced it a little bit, and we got it down to 9, then it went up to 15, and I think lately I heard somebody say something about 30 or something. All these numbers, and when you bandy them around, they can be dangerous. So I think we need to be very careful that we get the right data. And the only way we're gonna do that is to know, what do we actually want to build? Like, what do we as a community want if it's breakwaters? And I'm not saying that it is breakwaters necessarily. I'm saying that it is a discussion about breakwaters, and let's decide as a community if that's actually something that we want. And if we do, okay, what does that mean? What do breakwaters mean? Is it one of these living breakwaters that we're talking about? Maybe those are more expensive. I have no idea. Sophie Romana at one point had mentioned, could a breakwater have some other purpose? Energy production? Is there some other thing that we could get out of it? That's another cool idea. I have no idea. But all of those things would come with different price tags. So I think it's really important that we do recognize the financial impact, and that we continue to have that be part of the budget process and the overall town discussion. But I think we also need to be careful that we don't let the dollars rule the discussion. I think part of the reason why the breakwater discussion sort of it ended is that it was so big, the numbers were so big, it's such a massive project, we can't even take it on. And I think what we have proven in January was that we don't have a choice to take on the discussion. We have to turn over every stone and figure out what we can possibly do, whether it's that or something else, because it could be something totally different. I don't know what it might be, but it might be something completely different that would help resiliency. Bob.
Yeah, I think that there's a question of who is having these conversations, what entity or whatever. And that I think on a preliminary basis, I think that harbor committee is appropriate for certain questions, which is, what do we want the harbor to look like? And I must say, before all these storms, and I heard about the breakwater, and I saw how they were laid, it's not a breakwater, they were all these breakwaters. How they were all laid out, I'm thinking, are you kidding me? That's what we want the harbor to look and feel like, and why are we doing that? And for most of the harbor, it's called boats in the summer, not we're building a harbor for December to enjoy our harbor in December, in January. But as times evolved, I thought, if we're really doing the resiliency thing, that at least the part of the breakwater that's sort of using the ledges to the left, to the north of, or east of our entrance. You know, if we don't talk about that, then the rest of it is deck chairs, because there's gonna be more of these storms, and, you know, you're just deciding how you're gonna get pulverized, but you're not actually preventing that. But, and then I'm thinking, well, what do we want the harbor to look like? If we're building a breakwater so that 5 docks can be resilient in the winter, that's not a great trade-off. So that's why I'm getting this. So what do we want? What is our priority in the harbor? And that a breakwater might make a difference to. But once you get past conversations like that, you're in budget, or you're in the technical sphere of, well, what will act, what, I'm just making this up. What sort of riprap is the right riprap to be proposing? Well, I'm sorry, I don't have that expertise, or time. So I think that there's a question of where to start the conversation. And I think the conversation doesn't start with numbers. It starts with, what do we want? And I keep thinking about the pictures that Stephen Betts puts in the paper of the Rockland Breakwater. I guarantee you, when they were planning that breakwater, nobody thought that was gonna happen, that at a high tide with no particular wind, 2/3 of the breakwater was underwater. So what we need to be thinking about the 50 and 100 years out. To me, the turn of the century is not very relevant. But I was having this conversation with some high school kids a few years ago, and I realized they have an expectation of being alive then. So the bottom line is, thinking about 50 and 75 years out is not ridiculous. But a lot of it is values. What do we want? And then you get down to where Jeremy is having to do the legwork of what's it gonna cost and who can pay for it, what kind of grants can we get? But the first needs to be a conversation about what is it that we're actually trying to preserve and create for 50 to 75 years from now.
I envision some of those conversations all happening as part of this. I mean, that's kind of, I think, a big piece of this. I mean, the plan is to have a day or two, like full-on day or two on meeting with the community on what we envision within the harbor, with the consultants that are experts in trying to manage that and hoping to facilitate that long term and keep that going. So I think that this, I think, to me is the good starting off point, because I think those questions are going to be answered and people are going to be able to have that conversation together in a group, formal.
Stephanie was raising his hand.
Oh, hello, Stephanie.
Josh,
You
I
wanna
was just
talk, or
wondering,
you just waving?
well, I was waving, but I have
Oh.
something, I have a question to ask. I know in my tenure on the select board, I've been told multiple times that the select board hasn't given proper direction to certain committees. So the scope of what they have come back with hasn't really encompassed what perhaps was intended. So I guess my question is, will you be asking the select board to kind of task you with any part of this that you want to tackle? I could just envision that there's going to be a lot of elements that need to be looked at and studied. Question, I just am looking to know, do you need to get a direction to be able to work on whatever parts? If I'm
I think
coming
that-
across it.
Yeah, totally. No, I think that to answer your question, Stephanie, direction from the select board is always a good idea. And for this committee and any committee, we are putting, or I am proposing this harbor resiliency plan development because it hasn't happened and we haven't gotten that direction from the select board. And we're sort of done with waiting. And so we're going to move forward with it. That being said, we are an advisory committee. And so we would love for the select board to know what we want to do and what we are doing. I do think that we have the right to put forward a development proposal for the harbor, which is what we're doing. But I want the select board to be part of it. It's not the harbor committee doing this on its own, but rather the harbor committee doing it because the harbor committee hasn't gotten that direction, because the town has a lot of other priorities, a lot of other things going on. But we, as the people most directly connected to the harbor on this committee, I think have an obligation to move it forward. So that's why we're doing that. So does that answer your question? And you know, it does tie into all the other things going on in town. You know what I mean? We do have this planning board proposal that is being put through obviously very quickly. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, this all of what's being discussed there in a bridge period should be part of this harbor resiliency plan. That's all completely related. And so let's make that part of that discussion is where I'm at with that.
I do think, Stephanie, in the harbor ordinance, I can send you this link just so you have it, about what the harbor committee kind of defines their roles. It's pretty wide open, and allows the harbor committee to dive into some of these things and provide some information to the select board. So I'll share that with you, but Josh and I have chatted about that previously. I think it's a good point, but I do think the harbor committee has the ability to go down some of these paths on their own.
But by the same token, you know, again, you're speaking out of both sides of my mouth, like I always do. You know, we're 6, 7 people, wherever we are, you know, we cannot do it all. We can, and I want to get it started and I want to sort of provide some sort of framework and organization for this, but we need everyone involved. We need the planning board, we need the conservation commission, we need the town, we need everybody involved. If we do it on our own, that's not gonna be productive. Bruce?
This is a big project.
Yeah.
Where do you see the ultimate direction, or do you see the harbor committee as spearheading this effort and talking to other people? Because you're writing grants already and you're not. What I'm saying is that it seems like you want to have one big product, but we've already got piecemeal parts working on it.
I almost think that at some point, once we get through this process, and maybe what I would recommend as part of one of the outcomes of this, I mean, this project's gonna be done by September, October of this coming year, so this is gonna happen pretty rapidly. Maybe November, but what I'd like to probably see is some harbor committee, like kind of a bigger group that's working on this, and just not, again, like you're saying, not just happening in silos. So grab some people from the harbor committee, planning board, conservation committee, select board, other business groups, other entities.
Yeah, you do a speedboat landing.
Yeah, come together and actually kind of try to make this a broader community effort and plan moving forward. I mean, I even think like Camden can have some of those folks maybe involved. I think there's a lot of different stakeholders that all have lots of good insight and history and background in the harbor and want to keep, everyone recognizes exactly what Josh says. You know, if this harbor isn't what it is, I mean, we're gonna have serious challenges here in Camden. So I think everyone, that's what I envision.
Yeah, it's necessary and important at this point.
And involving, like Jeremy said, involving everyone, landowner, you know, private property owners, municipal property owners, which is the town, businesses, and even recreation, you know, people who just use the harbor, maybe they just look at the harbor, that's something, but somebody who has a kayak, somebody who has a boat, you know, all aspects, visitors even should probably be represented.
I mean, I will say, like, the planning board, I mean, I obviously serve as staff to them, those storms, I mean, were so impactful, and they had, I mean, I think they've been going down this path where they have been on piers, and I think you're aware of that, but these storms were so significant, and that's why there are maintenance standards and those kind of requirements included in the proposed amendments moving forward, but they're not by any means done with this conversation. I know they want to keep this conversation going on how to best manage the harbor and make sure it's resilient. I mean, things that we haven't even touched about in these proposals are armored shorelines, and the impact on adjacent properties, the impact of scour and all that stuff that I know that they wanna address further and look at. So, I mean, I think time is, I mean, as horrible as those storms were and it's devastating, I mean, they definitely, I think, woke people up to something that we're seeing that's happening repetitively year after year after year, and it's just happening more and more. The idea that this stuff's not gonna continue is, we can't come from that perspective. We gotta plan.
Can't climb under that rock.
No, we gotta just plan that these are like the norms now, and how do we, handle those norms in the most resilient and sustainable and economically effective way.
Should we put it on our next meeting's agenda to start defining the scope?
I think so. I think that this, similar to some of the other things that we have done, Steamboat Landing being one of them, you may recall was on every agenda for X. I don't see this as lasting forever, though. I think that's important. I see this as something that is probably about a year-long process. And, but that we should have something done, that conversation, that community conversation should be complete, for lack of a better term.
We need to tie we've got all these projects sitting up on the shelf, from the public landing to Steamboat Landing, and
that's what this
needs to
this
all
is like,
get
let's bring
an
it all.
overall comprehensive.
I think a year makes sense, because I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it was just.
No, I think a year makes sense. If this project's gonna be done in end of the fall, the final report's gonna be done October, November, it just leads right.
Exactly.
We continue that going, and then hopefully this time next year, we're kind of like wrapping up. How do we make this actually
I
happen?
think we even build, sort of work on the larger plan while that,
Mhm.
that sort of grant funded thing is going on. It's kind of like.
Yeah.
It'd be a little bit beyond. Excellent. I think this is a great discussion. I appreciate all the feedback here, Bob.
Well, I
I'm
want,
not quite,
One
One
more.
sec, Jim.
Josh, on the, in my experience, having done some major projects like this with the US Navy and with some foreign, navies and so forth, that, your step one is to do an operational scenario description of what it is you're trying to preserve. And we need to understand, here are all the operations, the things that we do with the harbor, and what is it we want to sustain, and over, what is the annual cycle that we're trying to maintain? Because, if we continue to look at Camden as being a limited, seasonal usage with no operations, beyond September, and not, reopening until May, there's a whole lot of different solutions that come out of that, as opposed to, trying to maintain operations through the entire year, and whether or not, to what extent. And then if you're seeing damage every year, to what extent are you trying to prevent that damage? So those are some of the key questions that have to be answered, aside from all the aesthetics and the rest of that. And I hope that we can focus on getting those requirements laid out and some consensus built around that, so that there's a framework for the plan. Otherwise, the plan is just going to be, again, a bunch of flowery words. So that's all.
Absolutely. Now, and I think, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, because this is the next discussion, but, that's why I brought up the natural environment versus the built environment. The natural environment doesn't take the winters off. So, I think we do need to look at, what we want to protect there. It's more than boats, it's more than piers, it's more than houses. But all of those things are included. So, I think it's a broad, Bob, do you have something?
yeah, process wise. And I'm not saying you're saying this, even though at the beginning, out of one side of your mouth, I thought you were saying this, that I think that the harbor committee just saying, we're gonna start working on this, we're gonna come up with all of this, and we don't need the select board or anyone else to ask us to take this on, I think is a huge mistake. I think that at our next meeting, maybe we should come up with the idea of what we want this process-wise to look like. And one question I would have, is it really the harbor committee who has conversations outside with people? Or is the harbor committee essentially steering a working group that's meeting, and the meetings will be at a completely different time from regular harbor committee meetings? So that you have, it might be the harbor committee with two people from this, two people from that, two people from that, and that working group, which has to have, someone has to have the hand on the tiller. That working group is going to come up with some sort of plan, and when we make that approach, ask the select board to bless it. We would like a working group like that to talk about this, focused not as just an agenda item, but as the only agenda item for that group. So,
Yes, Jeremy, have there been discussions, between the select board and the town regarding any kind of coordinated effort, a working group, the hand on the tiller, as Bob says?
No, I don't think anything formal, no. No, I do think it's appropriate. I think that's probably the best way to go. Planning board's interested, they've been concerned about it, they want to jump into it. I know the conservation committee's the same. I know you guys are the same, that's what I would recommend, another a working group of some sort, and then that group reports back to the harbor committee.
well,
You know, what they're doing, and then that planning board liaisons to that working group can report back to the planning board and kind of all.
I think it is important for the harbor committee, because what we're really talking about is the harbor, right? And the planning board and the conservation commission, all these people touch that. But in terms of, like I said, the big picture of what do we want the harbor to look like? What are we planning to create? What are we planning to preserve? That's part of this conversation. And that, but it needs a formality and a focus. That it's not, like I said, just part of a regular meeting where someone occasionally shows up at the audience.
Correct. Yeah, this was, and the harbor is itself part of a bigger picture. And I think it really falls to the select board to define what the direction is going to be and how they want to see it happen, because the harbor committee has no authority to tell anybody what to do. So if there's gonna be some coordinated effort, it has to be come from the top. So I looked at the select board to provide some direction for the community. There are all of these efforts going on now. We have Camden Citizens, grassroots organization. They have the planning board. We've seen their efforts, and resiliency is a big topic now. Of course, it's a big issue for the harbor committee here. But it's a big picture, and it's not just the harbor. And I think we need some coordinated civic effort. I know Jeremy has a lot of things that he's undertaken and he's already actively working on.
So
So,
I think, I mean, to jump on that, Elliot, and close the loop on this, I think you're all exactly correct. The one thing I would say is, and Bob touched on it, is that the harbor committee, we are only focused on the harbor, though we may have interests elsewhere. That is the one, that is our domain. And so therefore, I think it's appropriate that we, are bringing this forward and essentially forcing this forward. I think that the town is rightfully engaged in discussions about a climate resiliency plan for the entire town, because climate change happens beyond the harbor. But we, in order to maintain our focus, are the ones who stay focused on just the harbor. And so therefore we would lead that discussion with input from the planning board, the conservation commission, et cetera. Those entities will also be involved in the discussion about the snow bowl or the state park or whatever it might be. You see what I'm saying? That we keep it focused here. So this was a great discussion. I appreciate everybody's input. But I think we've gone on far enough. I think, further than we have to, but that's good. Committee membership update was actually what we were talking about earlier. We kind of jumped the gun on that, I guess, which was, with regards to our secretary, discussion, that we will be, appointing a secretary each meeting, if none volunteers. And then we can keep them simple. This will be a great test for you, Bob, because it's a much longer meeting than I intended. It's gonna be a big post-it, but it, the.
No, I've
minutes-
already got it in my mind.
Perfect.
Discussion was had.
Look, discussion was had by all.
No decisions were made.
No decisions were made. We had no votes except for the minutes. Yeah, and the other thing is with scheduling wise, I know it has been brought up a little bit because I did move this meeting, from last week. It's important for everybody to know that, per the ordinance, these meetings are called by, either the select board, the planning board, or myself. And meaning as the chair. The chairman can call the meeting. We are choosing currently to have meetings once a month. We don't have to have meetings once a month. And we can have meetings every week. We can, heavens no, but we could have them every 6 months. So my point is, let's remember to be flexible. I think this committee, we did a lot of work last year, whether it was the peer recommendations and then the harbor fees, discussions. It's a lot of work being on this committee, and I don't want it to burn anyone out, or overburden anyone, and I include myself in those words. So let's, be careful, and cognizant of what we all can take on. I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate you guys' time being on Zoom, and, we should say, when is the next meeting? I think with this discussion, we should do a meeting in March. And we have been doing it as the second Tuesday of the month, which would be the 12th of March. Does that work for everybody as a tentative date, knowing that we can always change it? March 12th. See you 0800 on March 12th.
And I just make the suggestion that maybe that, since I'm not sure there's anything else hot, maybe that should be a meeting where we have the harbor master report, adoption of the minutes, and then we just talk about
Go in.
what are we gonna propose to the select board as our resiliency conversation group.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Josh,
Thank
can
you
I
all.
just,
Oh,
if people have, comments on the proposed, peer amendments that are going to the planning board and zoning ordinance, just send me an email. If you have any comments, I can share them with
So
you.
does those, because we've talked about that, does that go to you? or
Yeah, that goes,
planning board,
it's
or-
best to go to me and then I will share them, with the planning board.
Okay.
What we don't want to happen is minutes or questions, comments go to the planning board members and then they start discussing with somebody or share them with somebody and not everyone. So get them to me and then I will disseminate them to everyone.
Is that meeting on the 29th, a Zoom meeting or a public, in person?
It's in person and will also be zoomed. There are 4 public hearings that night, so it'll be a long night, I think. The
Here,
peers are the first thing on the agenda. Yeah.
Is this true?
5 o'clock.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you.